right. Hi. So today is Saturday, December 11th. We have 2 weeks left, which means maybe 2 stories left if I even do them. I don't know that I'm doing a great job, but I know that the more you practice, the better you do. So I'm going to practice today by reading a story. Today has been kind of a rough day. I don't know who has anxiety in this world, but I sure do. I know that some of my friends do too. And one of my favorite things to do, it actually helps to bring me some peace and some understanding of where I am in the world and what I should be doing. I like to go back and read or study some of Carl Jung's advice. I think he's, of course, he was a psychiatrist for a long time, and he created a lot of sort of archetypes that people study and follow. And most people have heard of a shadow archetype, the subconscious, and where we push a lot of information that we don't want to deal with. And it's not just that, it's just information that sometimes is just unconscious, subconscious. Sometimes things we just don't acknowledge or aren't aware of. Anyway, so his shadow archetype is a lot of people know about. And it's really good if we address our own shadows and try to figure out what it is that we won't acknowledge about ourselves, which is, I think a lot of people need to do that. It's an important thing. But one of the things that made me feel really good today was learning about Carl Jung saying we don't just address the shadow archetype, we address our inner light, our inner angels, our inner beauty. And as obvious that should be, it's not obvious. A lot of times, especially if you have a reason to be anxious, like for me, I'm still looking for a job. I've been doing some work for my brother, which has been great, but I'm still looking for a job, and it feels good to do some work on it, like send in some applications, and I do that regularly. I just sent in another application to a job today that I thought would be interesting, but knock on wood, if I ever hear from anybody, it'd be a surprise, because at this point, I don't know. I'm invisible, right? So Carl Jung helps me feel a little bit better, and so today I learned about, I've been learning about the individuation process and how you just do the best you can to be fully who you are, whether it's your light or whether it's your dark. Just who are you, and living to that reality, living to that your potential, or living to your inner desire, trying to be who you really want to be. It's hard in this world. You have to fit into a mold in this world. You have to be socially savvy enough that people don't hate you on social media. And I don't know. It's a tough world to navigate, for sure. And I know I'm not the only one who suffers, but today was one of those days of suffering. And so I decided to follow actually Jung's advice. And one of the things he says is, you have anxiety, action is the opposite of anxiety. If you're not doing what you want to be doing, then you will have anxiety. And so I just thought, it doesn't pay anything, but I love stories. And if there's one thing that's going to make me feel better today, it's not to sit on my hands and think, oh, nobody gives a shit about Christmas stories, and so I'm not going to do it. Because you know what? I was thinking that. And it's not a, woe is me. It's just, there's too much else in the world, too many options, too many beautiful things. And I'm just such a small part of the world. But you know what? This means something to me because I do like stories, and I especially love old tales. And old stories are different than new stories. They're, new stories you write as if you are viewing the whole thing. You see the action. You write the action so it can be seen instead of tell the action. And in these old stories, a lot of times it's you tell the action. And so it's a different concept of storytelling than the modern storytelling archetype, I guess. And it's just fun to go back and look at some of these old tales and the way that they're told. And so maybe I'll get a couple of viewers, maybe not. Maybe all of you have already tuned out, but most people have a 2-minute attention span or something at the most. So if you're still here, we've been on 5 minutes. So if you're still here, wow, kudos. Good job. Anyway, I'm going to read this really fun story today, and I'm not going to do it perfectly, but I don't care. It's a great story, and it's worth hearing. So, Oh, What a Horrid Tale by P.S., whoever that is. P.S. Here we go. All right. Come, friends, gather around the fireside and listen to the sad but seasonable tale of Ernie the actor. Ernie was one of those actors who could only find fame at Christmas. He could rule a Christmas pantomime like Roby or Little Titch, but between seasons he was lucky if he got a month's engagement with a concert party. Sad but true. However, he worked hard, lived soberly, and would doubtless have lasted to a ripe and insignificant old age, had not the course of his life been strangely altered by his marrying a Mrs. Tonks, a widow with 4 young children and an eye for the pay packet. Mrs. Tonks had booked a scat for Cinderella to comfort herself for the recent death of her first husband. She liked a joke as well as the next woman, and she liked a good cry too. Ernie made her laugh so much that, being at once so happy and so sad, she fell in love with him immediately. Ernie fell more in love with her 4 children than with her, but nevertheless they got married. Now Ernie took his work so seriously that he could hardly cease being funny even when he was off the stage. His wife used to find his cross-talk and gags a great solace in her domestic worries, and the children were always happy when Ernie was home because his antics kept them laughing all the time. As the years went by, however, the children needed more and more food and more clothes, while Mrs. Ernie asked for more and more of Ernie's money. Ernie's engagements, on the other hand, became fewer and fewer, and he found it less and less easy to earn enough money to pay the larger and larger bills. The strain of working too hard and always being anxious for the future told at last on Ernie's temper. He began to dislike returning home after a tiring round of the manager's offices, only to be treated by his family as a joke. One day he brought his fist down on the breakfast table with a bang and said, "No more, I won't. And putting his hat on his head, he announced that he was going to apply for a straight part and act the clown no more. It was not easy to persuade the managers that he meant what he said, and most of them laughed, offered him a cigarette, and exclaimed, "Jolly good joke, eh?" But one of them jestingly offered him the part of the Demon King in Aladdin at a little second-rate theater in Staffs for a salary which is half his former wage. But Ernie accepted it. "Well, you don't expect me to spend Christmas Day in the workhouse, do you?" said Mrs. Ernie when he told her the news. He said to Mrs. Ernie when he told her the news. And without more ado, she departed with the children to stay at my eyes, I can't see very well. Chorlton-cum-Hardy with her married sister. But the pantomime ran for 9 weeks, and the local dramatic critic wrote that no more terrifying Demon King has ever walked the boards of the Alexandria. When the last performance was ended, Ernie was paid a bonus. He packed his belongings and took the first train to Chorlton-cum-Hardy that he might tell his wife of his success. His welcome, however, was not as happy as he could be expected. When he put his head around the door, he was greeted, not by cries of pleasure, or yet of laughter, but by startled faces and a shriek of horror. Ernie pretended not to notice it, but the weeks that followed, it became clear that everyone was afraid of him. The children wept if he took them on his knee, and even Mrs. Ernie, who was so buxom and handy with a rolling pin, would shrink away when he approached. Ernie was quite unable to account for this. It pained him more than any mockery could do, for he was naturally a gentle man. After some months, he began to feel that his having played the Demon King had something to do with it. And now he often wished that he were Buttons or the broker's man once more, so that he could move them to laughter instead of fear. When the time came for him to make his contract for the next year's pantomime, he decided that he wouldn't be the Demon King. He even refused the parts of the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk and the wicked uncle in Cinderella, for which good and comfortable salaries were offered. He no longer wished to frighten people. The managers very naturally considered him daft to refuse good offers, and he would have gone without any engagement at all had not Puss in a touring company of Dick Whittington and his cat fallen from the balustrade of the dress circle and lost its ninth and last life. Almost in despair, for there were only 4 days until the first performance, the manager offered the part to Ernie, and Ernie accepted it. He had never played an animal part before, but he very quickly learned what to do. He scratched, meowed, and purred to a nicety. It was very pleasant to feel once more the affection of an audience instead of hatred. But before the season was finished, Ernie had become a favorite with actors and the public alike. But what made him happiest of all was that his own family's fear of him suddenly dissipated. Mrs. Ernie began to put her arms around his neck and caress him with every token of kindness. When the children no longer dreaded his touch, but climbed about him and played all sorts of loving games with him. Ernie was affected almost to tears by his love and tenderness, and thereafter he lived happily for several years, continuing to play Puss the Cat at every Christmas pantomime. He only suffered 2 discomforts. One was that he was expected, and indeed compelled, to sit and sleep upon the mat, instead of an armchair or his bed. The other was that Mrs. Ernie forbade him to have a drop of beer or stout or whiskey, but insisted instead that he should always drink milk. After he had played Whittington's Cat or Puss in Boots at almost every reputable theater in the province, the time came when Ernie was no longer as supple in his limbs as a first-class cat should be. Giving long thought to the matter, he finally made up his mind that he ought to take another part before people began to say, "Poor old Ernie isn't as nimble as he used to be." And after talking with his agent, he contracted to play a part which entailed much less activity and effort than did that of Puss, namely the title role in Mother Goose. Unfortunately, Ernie's new salary was much less than that which he had earned before. Mrs. Ernie had some hard things to say when he told her about this and blamed him very much for giving up his old part. But Ernie took great pride in his calling and informed her in no uncertain tones that there is more honor in competently laying a golden egg than in being but a lame companion to Dick Whittington. The difference of opinion led to the first dispute between husband and wife since the days of the Demon King. The first rehearsals of Mother Goose went well, so well that Ernie begged his wife to come with the children to see the dress rehearsal, which was to take place on Christmas Day. But Mrs. Ernie refused, and when the day came, Ernie left for their lodgings to a volley of recrimination from his better or worse. The performance went from start to finish without a hitch, a most unusual happening in pantomime. As Ernie returned to the lodgings, he felt that he had never given a better performance in his whole career, and he regretted more than ever that none of his family had been present to see his triumph. When he arrived, he found that his wife and the children had gone to bed, so he sat down before the fire in the sitting room, as was his wont, and soon fell asleep. Mrs. Ernie rose from her bed on the next morning in an evil temper. She was still furious about her husband's preference for art over money, and she was disappointed at having been unable to afford a turkey for the children's Christmas dinner. She came downstairs and opened the door of the sitting room. To her surprise, Ernie was not there, but in front of the fire, preening its feathers, was a fat gray goose. With a cry of delight, Mrs. E ran in the kitchen and fetched a carving knife. The children enjoyed their dinner that day more than on any other Boxing Day, and they all agreed that if there was one fowl more tender and delicious than a turkey, it's a nice fat goose. That's one of my favorites. That was good. I like that. Well, I hope you enjoyed your story, and happy Saturday.